Alien Cowboy mocked the tale of 10 Bigfoots until they challenged him at high noon. The laughter that erupted from Jediah Storm's throat was loud enough to rattle the whiskey glasses behind the bar of the Silver Dollar Saloon. But what made every patron freeze in their seats wasn't the volume. It was the harmonic undertones that no human vocal cords could produce, sounds that seemed to vibrate through the wooden walls and into the very bones of everyone present. The grizzled prospector who had been telling his tale of encountering 10 massive, hairy creatures in the mountains above Cedar Falls looked up from his drink with the wounded expression of a man whose honest account had been treated as barroom comedy. 10 Bigfoots, you say? Jediah wheezed between bouts of alien laughter, his pale blue eyes streaming with tears that glowed faintly in the lamplight. Old Charlie, I've heard some tall tales in my time, but that one takes the prize. Next, you'll be telling us they had a tea party and invited you to join them. The other patrons joined in the laughter, though nervously, as they always did when Jediah Storm found something amusing. There was always something unsettling about the way their most successful rancher expressed mirth. What none of them knew was that Jediah Storm had been walking the American frontier for 43 years, long enough to catalog nearly every species of indigenous life on the continent, and in all his extensive observations, he had never encountered anything resembling the creatures that humans called Bigfoot or Sasquatch. His scientific instruments, hidden throughout his seemingly ordinary ranch, would have detected any large, unknown species operating in the region, and his reports to his superiors among the stars had consistently dismissed such tales as human folklore with no basis in biological reality. Charlie Bronson, the prospector whose story had triggered such amusement, was a man who had spent 30 years in the mountains and had learned to read sign that would be invisible to city folk. His weathered face flushed red with anger as he stood up from his bar stool, swaying slightly from the effects of rot-gut whiskey, but steady enough to point an accusing finger at the alien who had made him a laughingstock. "You can laugh all you want, Storm," Charlie slurred, his voice carrying the conviction of a man who knew what he had seen. "But I'm telling you, there's things up in them mountains that don't belong in any natural order. 10 of them standing in a circle around a campfire like they was holding some kind of council. Biggest damn creatures I ever laid eyes on. And smart. Smarter than any animal has a right to be." Jediah wiped his eyes and tried to compose himself, though occasional chuckles still escaped his alien physiology. "Charlie, my friend, I've been ranging these territories for more years than most men have been alive, and I've never seen hide nor hair of any such creatures. You probably saw some bears standing upright, maybe caught a glimpse of them through morning mist that made them look bigger than they were." The dismissive tone in Jediah's voice was calculated to end the conversation and return the saloon to its normal evening rhythm of card games and casual conversation. But Charlie Bronson was not a man to let his word be questioned without response, especially not by someone whose success and confidence had always rankled the struggling prospector. "Bears, my ass!" Charlie exploded, slamming his fist down on the bar hard enough to make the bottles jump. "I know bears when I see 'em, Storm, and these weren't bears. They was standing on 2 legs like men, but covered in dark fur and tall as tree trunks. And when they noticed me watching, they didn't run off like wild animals. They looked right at me with eyes that held intelligence, and one of them pointed in my direction like he was giving orders to the others." The saloon had fallen completely silent now, with every patron listening to an exchange that was growing more heated by the moment. Jediah's enhanced alien senses detected elevated stress hormones throughout the room, the electromagnetic signatures of humans who were uncomfortable with conflict, but fascinated by the possibility that their mundane frontier existence might contain genuine mysteries. "Charlie," Jediah said, his voice taking on the patient tone of someone explaining basic facts to a child, "you're describing creatures that would have to weigh 400 or 500 pounds each, creatures that would leave tracks, shed hair, require enormous amounts of food, and inevitably come into contact with hunters, trappers, or other travelers. The fact that no physical evidence of such beings has ever been documented suggests that your encounter was probably influenced by factors other than objective observation." The words were carefully chosen to sound like gentle skepticism rather than outright mockery, but their effect was to further inflame Charlie's wounded pride. The prospector's face had gone from red to purple, and his hands were shaking with the kind of rage that came from having his most extraordinary experience treated as delusion or outright fabrication. "Physical evidence?" Charlie snarled, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing something that he slammed down on the bar with enough force to crack the wood. "How's this for physical evidence, you pompous bastard? What Charlie had thrown onto the bar was a tuft of coarse, dark hair, unlike anything Jediah had seen in 4 decades of studying Earth's biosphere. His enhanced vision immediately detected cellular structures that were clearly mammalian, but organized in patterns that didn't match any known species in his extensive xenobiological database. More disturbing still, his sensitive olfactory systems detected chemical signatures that spoke of intelligence, tool use, and social organization, far beyond what any undiscovered primate species should have possessed. The hair sample sent shock waves through Jediah's alien nervous system, as his scientific training collided with evidence that contradicted everything he thought he knew about the continent's indigenous life. If creatures like the ones Charlie described actually existed and had remained undetected by his sophisticated monitoring systems, it suggested either massive failures in his equipment or the presence of beings whose capabilities extended far beyond normal biological parameters. Jediah picked up the hair sample with fingers that trembled slightly as his alien physiology processed information that challenged fundamental assumptions about his mission and his understanding of Earth's ecosystem. The cellular structure was definitely terrestrial in origin, but it had been modified or enhanced in ways that suggested intelligence that could manipulate genetic patterns with precision that even his own people would find impressive. "Where exactly did you encounter these creatures?" Jediah asked, his voice now carrying none of the casual dismissal that had characterized his earlier responses. His enhanced hearing detected changes in his own vocal patterns that would be imperceptible to humans, but which indicated the kind of stress response that his species experienced when confronted with data that didn't fit existing theoretical frameworks. Charlie's expression shifted from anger to satisfaction as he recognized that his evidence had finally gotten the attention it deserved. Up in Devil's Canyon, about 20 miles north of the old mining camp, they had a fire going in a clearing that looked like it had been used for such purposes many times before, and they were passing what looked like tools back and forth between them. Not sticks and rocks, mind you, but crafted implements that suggested they understood metallurgy and tool-making. The implications of Charlie's description were staggering from Jediah's perspective as a xenobiologist and intelligence operative. If unknown intelligent beings were operating in the territory under his surveillance, beings sophisticated enough to avoid detection by advanced alien technology while maintaining their own technological capabilities, it represented not just a scientific discovery, but a potential security threat of the highest magnitude. "Charlie," Jediah said carefully, his alien mind racing through tactical possibilities and protocol requirements, "I owe you an apology for my earlier skepticism. This evidence you've provided suggests that there are indeed phenomena in these mountains that deserve serious investigation. Would you be willing to guide me to the location where you encountered these beings?" The prospector's response revealed both his satisfaction at finally being taken seriously and his awareness that returning to Devil's Canyon might involve risks that even whiskey courage couldn't overcome. "I'll take you there, Storm, but I'm warning you that those creatures aren't likely to appreciate visitors. The way they looked at me suggested they weren't accustomed to being observed by humans, and they might not react kindly to a return visit." What followed was perhaps the most unusual expedition in the history of the American West, as an alien intelligence operative and a human prospector set out together to investigate reports of creatures whose existence would challenge the understanding of both their species. Jediah's preparations for the journey included equipment that appeared to be normal frontier gear, but actually represented technology sophisticated enough to analyze and document phenomena that human science wouldn't discover for another century. The trail to Devil's Canyon led through terrain that became increasingly wild and isolated as they climbed into the mountain regions above the tree line. Jediah's enhanced senses detected signs of large-scale habitation that his instruments should have identified years ago, paths that had been carefully maintained to look natural, evidence of sophisticated waste management systems, and electromagnetic signatures that suggested the presence of technology far more advanced than anything that primitive creatures should have possessed. Charlie proved to be an experienced guide whose knowledge of mountain conditions and wilderness survival was invaluable for navigating terrain that would have defeated most travelers. But as they climbed higher into the peaks, both men began to sense that they were being observed by intelligences that were evaluating their presence and intentions with the kind of systematic analysis that suggested military or scientific training. The encounter, when it finally came, was nothing like either of them had expected. They crested a ridge overlooking Devil's Canyon just as the sun reached its zenith, and found themselves looking down at a sight that challenged every assumption about intelligence, civilization, and the nature of consciousness itself. 10 massive figures stood in perfect formation in the clearing below, their positions suggesting not random gathering, but carefully orchestrated presentation. They were indeed covered in dark fur, as Charlie had described, but their bearing and organization spoke of intelligence that had been developed through centuries of social evolution and technological advancement. More shocking still, they were clearly waiting for Jedediah and Charlie's arrival, having positioned themselves in a manner that suggested they had been tracking the two travelers' approach for hours or even days. When one of the creatures raised what appeared to be a crafted staff and pointed it directly at Jedediah's position, the meaning was unmistakably clear. They had been expected, and their presence was being acknowledged through methods that transcended species boundaries. The voice that reached them across the canyon carried harmonics similar to Jedediah's own alien vocal patterns, but organized according to linguistic principles that suggested independent development of advanced communication systems. The words, when they came, were in perfectly accented English despite being produced by vocal apparatus that should not have been capable of human speech. Jedediah Storm of the Galactic Observation Corps, you have mocked our existence and dismissed our intelligence as human folklore. We are the Sasquatch Council of the Northern Territories, and we challenge you to answer for your disrespect. Meet us in the canyon at high noon tomorrow, and we will demonstrate whether we are real enough to demand your acknowledgement and apology. The challenge hit Jedediah like a physical blow as he realized that his decades of careful surveillance had been completely ineffective against beings whose capabilities far exceeded anything he had imagined possible. The creatures below were not just intelligent, but were clearly aware of his true nature and mission, suggesting intelligence networks and information-gathering capabilities that rivaled or exceeded his own people's achievements. Charlie Bronson's reaction was even more dramatic, as the prospector found himself vindicated in the most spectacular way imaginable, while simultaneously terrified by the implications of what he was witnessing. "Sweet Jesus, Storm," he whispered. "They know who you are and what you are. How in hell is that possible?" The question was one that Jedediah couldn't answer with any certainty, but the evidence suggested that the Sasquatch had been studying him with the same systematic attention that he had been applying to human society, and with considerably more success. His alien technology and enhanced capabilities had been completely useless against beings who possessed their own advanced knowledge while maintaining perfect camouflage and operational security. The night that followed was one of the longest in Jedediah's extensive experience, as he grappled with implications that extended far beyond simple scientific discovery. If the Sasquatch possessed technology and intelligence sophisticated enough to avoid detection by galactic-level surveillance systems, they represented either an unknown indigenous development or the presence of another alien civilization that had been operating on Earth far longer than his own people had suspected. More immediately, the challenge they had issued was clearly not a simple matter of wounded pride, but rather a formal confrontation between intelligence operatives who had been conducting parallel operations in the same territory. The outcome of tomorrow's meeting would determine not just his personal situation, but potentially the entire future of alien-human relations on Earth. Charlie spent the night alternating between excitement at being proven right and terror at the prospect of witnessing a confrontation between beings whose capabilities he was only beginning to understand. His role as an unwitting catalyst for the situation had placed him at the center of events that could reshape his understanding of reality itself. Dawn came too soon and too slowly simultaneously, bringing with it the kind of crystalline mountain air that made every detail of the landscape stand out with painful clarity. Jedediah's alien senses were operating at maximum sensitivity as he and Charlie made their way down into Devil's Canyon, detecting electromagnetic signatures and biological patterns that spoke of intelligences far more sophisticated than he had given them credit for. The Sasquatch Council was already in position when they arrived, their formation suggesting both ceremonial significance and tactical advantage. Up close, their true nature was even more impressive than distance had suggested. These were beings who had achieved the kind of perfect integration between intelligence and environment that represented the highest achievements of evolutionary development. The leader of the council, a massive figure whose bearing suggested authority accumulated over many decades, stepped forward to address Jedediah directly. His words carried the formal courtesy that characterized diplomatic contact between advanced civilizations, but also the underlying steel that indicated serious consequences for inappropriate responses. Jedediah Storm, called among humans the finest rancher in the territory, known to your own people as Agent 7743 of the Galactic Observation Corps, you have spent 43 Earth years studying this world while remaining ignorant of its most successful indigenous intelligence. You have dismissed our existence as human superstition and mocked our representative when he brought you evidence of our presence. Do you acknowledge your error and offer appropriate apology for your ignorance and disrespect? The challenge was delivered with the kind of precision that left no room for evasion or diplomatic maneuvering. Jedediah understood that he was facing beings whose intelligence and capabilities had been systematically underestimated, not just by him, but by his entire civilization, and that his response would determine whether this first contact would lead to cooperation or conflict. His alien training had prepared him for many types of first contact scenarios, but none had anticipated encountering indigenous intelligence that had achieved advanced development while remaining completely hidden from galactic surveillance systems. The protocols that governed such situations were clear about the importance of acknowledging superior achievement and offering appropriate respect to beings who had demonstrated capabilities that exceeded his own. Council leader, Jedediah replied, employing the formal diplomatic language that his people used for interactions with peer civilizations. I acknowledge that my understanding of this world's indigenous intelligence was incomplete, and I offer my sincere apology for dismissing evidence of your existence and sophistication. I would be honored to learn more about your people and to explore possibilities for cooperation and mutual understanding. The response he received revealed depths of planning and preparation that suggested the Sasquatch had been working toward this moment for years or even decades. The council leader's expression showed satisfaction, but not surprise, as if Jedediah's apology had been anticipated and prepared for through careful study of his psychology and behavior patterns. Your apology is accepted, Agent Storm, and your offer of cooperation will be considered by our council. But words alone cannot undo 43 years of ignorance and dismissal. You must demonstrate your sincerity through actions that prove your respect for our intelligence and capabilities. We propose a series of challenges that will test both your abilities and your willingness to acknowledge our achievements. What followed was perhaps the most unusual diplomatic negotiation in the history of either species, as representatives of galactic and terrestrial intelligence worked out the terms for a relationship that neither had anticipated when the day began. The challenges proposed by the Sasquatch were designed not to humiliate Jedediah, but to establish mutual respect through shared trials that would demonstrate the capabilities and limitations of both sides. The trials that took place over the following week challenged every assumption that both species had developed about intelligence, adaptation, and the possibilities for cooperation between radically different forms of consciousness. Jedediah's alien technology and enhanced capabilities proved impressive, but not decisive when matched against the Sasquatch's mastery of their environment and their sophisticated understanding of natural systems. More importantly, the interactions revealed that the Sasquatch had been developing their own theories about galactic civilization and the role that Earth might play in interstellar affairs. Their intelligence gathering about alien presence on their world had been far more comprehensive than any galactic power had suspected, and their strategic planning showed understanding of interstellar politics that rivaled the achievements of species with centuries of spacefaring experience. The friendship that gradually developed between Jedediah and the Sasquatch Council became the foundation for one of the most successful examples of interspecies cooperation in galactic history. The alien cowboy, who had mocked tales of 10 Bigfoots, discovered that his mockery had been based on ignorance rather than superior knowledge, and the indigenous intelligence that had challenged him at high noon proved to be the most valuable ally he could have hoped to find. Years later, as Jedediah sat around a campfire in Devil's Canyon sharing stories and strategic planning with beings who had become his closest friends and most trusted advisors, he often reflected on the lesson that Charlie Bronson's tale had taught him about the dangers of assuming that superior technology meant superior understanding. The Sasquatch who had challenged him had given him far more than humility. They had provided him with insights into Earth's development and potential that revolutionized not just his own mission, but his entire people's approach to studying and protecting developing civilizations. The mockery that had seemed so justified at the time had been transformed into the beginning of a partnership that enriched both species and created possibilities that neither could have achieved alone. The prospector, who had been laughed at for his tall tale, had inadvertently triggered the most important first contact event in Earth's hidden history, proving that sometimes the most extraordinary truths came disguised as the most unbelievable stories, and that wisdom could be found in the most unexpected places when approached with sufficient humility and respect for the unknown.